Hi, welcome to another edition of North Shore Journal. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski, and my very special guest today is Beverly City Clerk Wes Slate. Wes, welcome to the BevCam studio. And as most people out there know, this is an election year, 2016, and Wes and I are going to be talking about the voting process here in Beverly. We're going to be talking about where do you vote, how do you vote, and the voting process to help educate our viewers. And Wes, maybe we can start off by you explaining, as the city clerk, in kind of broad terms, what is your involvement, what is the responsibility of the city clerk's office with respect to the voting process and voting in the city?
Well, it's one of the three major parts of my job, Walt, the other two being the city council involvement as the clerk of the council, and then the day-to-day operation of the office, licenses and permits and like that. But as city clerk, I'm in charge of the elections, and I also certify the results. On any individual election day, we have about 100 people involved in the election, between the people in the office, the registrars of voters, the people that work at the polls, the police officers, public services that puts the signs out and everything. So it's a big undertaking. A lot of people involved in that very long day that starts early in the morning and sometimes lasts until late at night until we can get at least preliminary results posted. Yeah.
Now, these 100 or so people, now your staff, how many people actually work for the city on your staff?
There are 6 people in the office, including myself and Helen Butler, the assistant clerk. Mm-hmm. We have a part-time clerk, and we have a couple of volunteers that come in and help us out. I also am very fortunate in that my predecessor, Kathy Connolly, the former city clerk, is able to come in when she's available and help us out with the elections. And Fran McDonald, who was her predecessor city clerk, is one of the members of the Board of Registrars. So I'm very fortunate to have a very experienced group of people that have done elections many times and have worked on them, including the people that work at the polls just for that one day.
Yeah. Now, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts, shall we? The state primary, and we have a graphic there that we can show, graphic number 1. The state primary will be held on Thursday, September 8th. And the last day to register for that will be Friday, August 19th. I think that's about 3 weeks will be the last day to register. So tell us, what offices will people be voting for in the state primary, Wes?
A primary obviously is, depending on your voter registration, you'll be given either the ballot of your registered party, or if you are unenrolled, which people think of as being independent, you can choose the ballot. When you check in to vote, the inspector that checks you in will ask you which ballot you'd like if you're not registered in a party. For this particular September primary, there are a number of offices on the ballot. The only office on the primary ballot that really has multiple candidates is the office of sheriff of Essex County, and there are many candidates for that office.
Yeah, tell us about that.
There are on the Democrat ballot there are 6 candidates. On the Republican ballot there are 5, and then in November, in the general election, there will be 2 independent candidates that are not affiliated with a party that will also be on the November ballot. So this September, on September 8th, it'll really be about the sheriff's race. And the sheriff, of course, runs the jail, provides court security and prisoner transport, and does other things involved with people that are in custody. So it's a big job. It's a 6-year term. And there obviously is a lot of interest with that number of candidates that have collected signatures and have gotten themselves on the ballot. It's
and this is Sheriff of Essex County,
That's correct?
Right. Now, let's just so our viewers are clear on this. If you're a Republican, you will ask for a Republican ballot, so only those for the sheriff's position, let's say, and you will only pick a Republican candidate.
One of the 5 candidates that have been certified
Right.
to run.
And
That's
if you're a
correct.
Democrat, then you would get a Democrat, but
One of the
we'll
6.
only have the
That's right.
6. And then they will boil down to 1 each.
Correct.
But then in November, in the general election, the 2 independent candidates then will show up on the ballot. So
That's
they will
correct.
not appear on the primary
No,
ballot.
because they're not affiliated with a party, so they'll show up in November.
Right. And then there's a governor's council ballot, or they'll be voting for a governor's council as well, and then a state senator and a state rep. And I believe Congressman Moulton, the National Congress,
Right.
is okay. So that's a congressional, that's a Washington position.
That's correct.
And the state rep and the state senator, obviously,
They'll
are
be on the September ballot, Walt, but they have no opposition on the primary ballot, so they'll be the only candidates' names that apply. And by the way, the ballots themselves are posted in City Hall and the Secretary of State's office website, which I know we'll have a graphic for in a little while. You can actually go on the Secretary of State's website on the internet and put in your address, and it will actually show you the ballot that you will be seeing when you come to the polls on September 8th, or in advance of that if you're going to vote absentee. Or
and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, and just so we're clear, folks that are undeclared, or what's the term?
It's called unenrolled.
Unenrolled.
And it just means that they're not affiliated with a party, so when they go to vote on the 8th at the primary, they'll be asked to choose which ballot they would like.
Okay, so Democrats get a Democrat ballot, Republicans get a Republican, and unenrolled get whatever their choice is.
Right. There are 2 other ballots in the primary. One is the United Independent Party, which has a candidate for state representative, and the Green Rainbow Party, which has no candidates for the primary, but will have candidates in the presidential election in November.
Okay, okay. Now, let's talk about the national election, which is also the state election. This will be held on, and we have a graphic for that, this will be held on Tuesday, November 8th, which is
Right.
the second Tuesday of November. And again, the last day to register for that will be Wednesday, October 19th, which again, I think is like 2.5 or 3 weeks before that. Now, this year, well, all years, there's a provision for early voting, okay? And this year, there's something new that the state has developed. It's called no excuse absentee voting. We have a little graphic for that, and that's it's a little bit different than what has gone on before. So, Wes, if you could explain to our viewers just exactly what is meant by no excuse absentee voting, when it starts, and who can vote.
Sure. And this, again, will be for the November election, not for the primary.
Right.
Massachusetts is the latest state. There are 24 other states that have already instituted early voting, and what it essentially means is the informal name is no excuse absentee voting. It simply means that for the 2 weeks prior to the election, you'll be able to come into the office and request a ballot. You don't have to give us a reason. You're going to be out of town or medical or anything like that, and you'll be given a ballot and you'll be able to vote for the November election. We're going to be doing it in Beverly during regular business hours that City Hall is open. We are also so we're open Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday until 4:30. Thursday nights we're open late until 7:30, and then Fridays we close at 1. But for those 2 weeks beginning on October 24th for early voting, we're also going to have the Saturday where our office will be open for people that would like to come in on the Saturday, that middle Saturday, the week of the 24th, probably from 10 to 4. This will all be posted locally and statewide after the primary. Part of the reason that people probably haven't heard a lot about early voting so far is that the Secretary of State's office, when we've had meetings of the various clerk groups that I'm active in, the woman that runs the elections division has said that they didn't want to confuse people with the primary and talk about early voting until after the primary, so that people didn't think they could vote early other than absentee for the primary. But they will be able to vote for the November election. And there'll be a lot of publicity done by the state. We will also be doing things on BevCam and locally to promote it. The big message that I've tried to get through, and you'll hear me say this more than once between September and November, Walt, is part of my responsibility of running the elections is we want everyone who's eligible to vote to be registered, and we want everyone who's registered to vote. Typically in a presidential year like this, Beverly has voted over 80% turnout of the eligible voters. A state primary we might get, or a state election in the 2-year cycle, we might get 40%. Local elections, it varies depending on the candidates and how many offices are open. It varies between 20 and 40%. So a presidential year like this one, where we're voting for President of the United States, really gets people out to vote. There are people that only vote every 4 years in the presidential election. And again, we, our office operates strictly nonpartisan. It's people's individual private business whom they vote for, which ballot they take. That's entirely up to them. We just want to make sure that they're properly registered and that they're able to vote and they know when and where they can.
Okay, so let's make sure that we clarify. Now, for the state primary, you can still vote absentee.
Absolutely.
Just like you always have.
Right.
But you have to have an excuse. You have to be out of town or some other reason.
That's correct.
And so that's separate. This new no excuse is only for the national and the state election, where you can pick up a ballot without any excuse. You just say, I want to vote early.
That's right. And by the way, absentee voting will still be available for the November election, because there are people who are permanently disabled or unable to get to City Hall or to their polling place, and also or are out of the country serving in the military. They're abroad. They're not going to be physically present in Beverly on election day or able to get to the polls, and those people will still be able to vote absentee. Absentee voting will still be in effect for both elections. The new thing is the early voting just for the November election.
And that begins Monday, October 24th, correct? And that will extend all the way through the actual election day, November 8th?
No, it actually ends. It's for 2 weeks, ending on the Friday before the election. So it's from Monday the 24th of October to Friday the 4th of November.
Okay. And again, that will take place not at their regular polling place, but at City Hall.
Correct.
And in fact, we have BevCam, as you say, will be running some public service announcements on these various times and dates. But also, if you want to phone City Hall, I think we have a graphic for that. City Hall number 978-921-6000. And if you have a question, just ask for the city clerk's office, and they can answer any question that you may have regarding the early voting. And the Secretary of State's election division will be sending information out as well. Now, how will they be transmitting that? Will they be sending notices to every registered voter at their home, or how are they going to transmit?
They do. They actually, for the November elections every 2 years, including this one, the Secretary of State's office puts together a booklet. It usually has a red cover, and it goes out to every household in the Commonwealth. It has all the information about everything that's going to be on the ballots, instructions on how to vote if you're not registered. It also, and I should have mentioned this, there will be 4 ballot questions on the November election on various topics. And it will have an explanation of each of those ballot questions, a copy of the actual legislation that put them on the ballot, the petitions, and a pro and con argument for each of the ballot questions that are written by advocacy groups for the various questions. So one of the questions, for example, is to legalize recreational use of marijuana. That's going to be a ballot question, and there is a statement written by the organization, or an organization that's in favor of that question, and a statement by an organization that's against it. Same thing with charter schools. There's going to be a question on the ballot in November about expanding the number of charter schools in the state, and there'll be a question a statement written by the pro side and a statement written by the con side, the against side. And the effort by the secretary and the elections division is the same as what we try to do locally, which is to present nonpartisan information that gives the voter as much information as they can, so that hopefully they read the information, experience various types of media, and walk into the polls with informed information that they've decided how they feel about the candidates for office, and also the questions the 4 questions that'll be on the November ballot.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot. Now you mentioned that the first 2. What's the 3rd and 4th ballot referendum question?
I'm sorry, I don't remember. There were the only reason is originally there were about 23 groups, 23 questions that were. That started the process, and that we got nomination petitions for, initiative petitions to get on the ballot. It's a very involved process to collect the signatures statewide to get on the ballot. They have to go through the Attorney General's office to make sure that they don't conflict with the state constitution or with settled law. And then the Elections Division has to vet them also to put them in the format to get them on the ballot. So of the 20, I believe it was 23 different questions that started the process, these were the 4 that made it through.
We'll try to post that in.
So there'll be lots of information about them.
When the voters watch this show, we'll post in the 3rd and 4th question. Now, let's talk about if people are registered or not registered. Do they know if they are or don't? Now, can you assume that if you voted in the last election, you are automatically registered or not, or is that not a good assumption?
It's not a good assumption. The process involves the city census and the reminder cards that we're required to send out.
Tell us about that.
The short version, Walt, is that we're required by the election. Everything that has to do with elections throughout the state is governed by the election law book, which is a book about this big, and the laws that are written by the legislature of how elections are to be conducted. One of the requirements of the election law is that the city send out a census to every household in the city every January, and there are 20-some thousand households in Beverly. So we send out the company that we contract to do it sends out the census forms. They come back to us in a blue envelope. Pretty much we have a good return rate. Out of those, it used to be that we were missing about over 10,000 of those that we had to then send out the reminder postcards to. Over the years, the people that work in my office and who were there before me have worked very hard to get that number down so that as many people as we can get onto the voting rolls correctly are there. And this year we sent out about 2,700 of the reminder postcards with postage paid, so people don't have to even put a stamp on them. And all they have to do is verify that they're still at that address, sign their name, and send the card back. And we get a stack of those cards back every day. There have been questions. People have called the office, gone on social media, contacted the mayor's office, and with questions about it. We always encourage anyone who has a question about elections or voter registration or anything else, stop in the office anytime that we're open, give us a call. We can always go into the system. Any of the people in the office or the assistant clerk or myself can go into the system and verify what an individual's voter registration is, if they're active or inactive, if they're still at the same address. Again, we want everyone who's eligible to be registered, and we want everyone who's registered to vote. So that's all a part of the process. That the postcards are the most recent thing, and at the very, if they don't even do that, if they don't return the census form and they don't return the postcard and they just show up to vote, that's okay too. They simply have to provide some form of ID, picture ID that identifies themselves. The Secretary's office has a list of acceptable IDs that the poll workers can accept. And they'll be given, as long as they can do that, they'll be given an affidavit sheet that they sign under penalties of perjury that they are the person that they say they are. and they'll be given a ballot and they'll be allowed to vote. And any questions that come up at the polls that the poll workers, the inspectors and the clerks and the wardens at the polling place can't answer, they'll call our office and we'll do everything we can to verify while the person's at the polling place that they are eligible to vote,
right,
so that they can be given a ballot and allowed to vote that day.
Right. So again, if a voter doesn't remember filling out that census card or doesn't remember checking off the information on the postcard, you can still call the number we gave before to find out whether you're registered.
Absolutely.
And we also have a website, a state website, where we can register online, which is www.registertovote.ma.com. And even if you miss all of that, you are still making an attempt to allow people to actually prove who they are and vote right there at the.
That's correct.
So the idea is to not to disenfranchise anybody, to really allow everybody to vote, even if they miss all these all these other steps.
Well, and it's a very laborious process. Parts of it are, we have very good computer systems that the state uses to establish the voting list and the information the poll workers are given. But there are a lot of hands that touch these systems, and it's always possible that human error enters into the process. And the only thing we can do when it comes to our attention, whether it's someone that calls or comes in or shows up at the polls or goes online or whatever, is to make sure that the information is verified and they're put in the active status so they can get their ballot when they go to the polling place. The other part of it is, obviously, if we can resolve those issues in advance of the registration deadline or in advance of Election Day, it just makes the election process go quicker when people are lined up, which they very likely will be this November, for a very busy presidential year. Yeah. So as much as we can do in advance, we're happy to do it. We do it every day, and we're anxious to do it for anyone who calls us or gets in contact with us.
Right. Now, the state also has if you want to get on social media and send a tweet, it's hashtag know before you go, and I think we have that. We'll show that. But that's, again, if you have any other questions, you can use that social media site as a source for getting information.
And those are things that, when our office is closed, people can get to the state website and go right on, get right into the database and find out what their status is. That hashtag that you have up on the screen is also a way of communicating directly with the Elections Division, who manages the system. So what they're doing and what we're doing is just the same thing. We're trying to make sure everyone is eligible and is able to vote. We're actually, I mentioned the clerks organizations that I'm active in, as my predecessors were, and the North Shore clerks actually have a meeting the middle of September with Michelle Tassinari, who's the woman I mentioned earlier, who runs the Elections Division for the Secretary of State. And we're going to spend a couple of hours with Michelle going over all the ins and outs of this election and anything that's new, any of the new rules, because there are new things for every election, so that all of us are up on everything and can answer questions when they come to us on Election Day. And I will tell you that on a regular basis, I've had the chance to meet Michelle a number of times, and she's really sharp and really terrific and does an excellent job for the secretary running that division. She's an attorney herself, and a week doesn't go by that we'll have a question in our office that someone asks us a question that we're not quite sure of how it works based on their status. We'll call Michelle's office, we'll talk to one of the people in her office or with her directly, and she'll one of the amazing things that happened at one of the clerks' meetings recently was the Massachusetts clerks down in Plymouth a couple of months ago. Michelle had a room full of probably 300 clerks firing questions at her, and there wasn't a single question that she couldn't answer on the spot. She had a couple of people there from her office, But it wasn't one of these situations where somebody would ask her a question, and like you asked me about the 4 ballot questions, and I said, well, I remember 2 of them, but I don't remember. Michelle would know all 4 of them because she had all 23 to deal with. Well, and it's very impressive when you see that.
It's good to know that you got that kind of backup.
That's correct.
Now, for first-time voters, we have 6 wards here in the city, and I believe 2 precincts per. I'm going to put you on the spot again. So wards, go through wards 1 through 6, and for our viewers.
Ward 1, which is Ryle Side, votes at the Ayers Ryle Side School.
Okay.
Ward 2, where I live, Ward 2, which is downtown the waterfront and Goat Hill, votes at the public library, the main library on the Winter Street entrance. Ward 3, which is Gloucester Crossing and up McKay Street, votes at the McEwen School on Ball Street. Ward 4, which is basically the Cove area, votes at the Cove School on Eisenhower Drive. Ward 5, which is North Beverly, Brimble Avenue and the northern part of the city, votes at the North Beverly School, which is kind of off Brimble Avenue. There are a couple of turns, and there should be signs directing you to the school. And then Ward 6, which is Centerville, Beverly Farms, and Pride's Crossing, all votes at the Centerville School, which will have additional parking available when school opens up, thanks to a lot of hard work by the city, the mayor and the city council and Department of Public Services and the school department to increase the parking at the Centerville School for school itself and for voting and everyone else.
Brilliant! You've redeemed yourself. Now, let me just ask you. Some people wonder the cost of voting. You know, let's say this election. Give us an idea what the costs are, and are they borne strictly by the city? Is it a line item in your city clerk's budget, or is there any kind of money from the state or from Washington that helps defray that?
It's all of those, Walt. It is a line item in my budget, my portion of the city budget, the city clerk's office budget. In rough numbers, it costs us about $27,000 to run an election, whether 10% of the voters show up or 80% of the voters show up. To hold an election, figure about $27,000. Depending on what type of election it is, if it's a state or national election, we are reimbursed by the state for some of the expenses. A municipal election, a city election like we'll have next year in 2017, is a local expense. So things like the printing of the ballots, reimbursement for some of the extra hours that we have to stay open. One of the things that's happened in the last couple of years is that the state's become much more sensitive, or the legislature's been more sensitive to expenses that are borne by the cities and towns that were not reimbursed by the state. So between the state auditor and the Secretary of State, we are fortunate in getting some money back based on our actual expenses from the state. And just to let you know, that pool of money that only I can use and only I can use it for elections are going to allow me next year for the municipal election to buy new voting machines, because the voting machines that we use in Beverly are pretty much old technology. They're no longer manufactured. They're very reliable, and we always have a technician from the company on site on election day in case we have any problems. But we're in the process now of looking at the 2 different machines that have been certified for the state, and that state money that we've gotten in that elections account, in that reserve account, I'll be going to the city council for authorization to spend that money on new election voting equipment starting next year. We're not going to do it this year because it would be too busy. But
well, now, we have about a minute left. Wes, you did mention that there is a lot of interest this year, and especially because of the interest in the national election. So what kind of voter turnout do you expect this year, and how does that compare maybe with the last few elections, quickly?
Well, generally, and I think I mentioned earlier, Walt, we in a presidential year, Beverly has turned out over 80% of the eligible voters, registered voters. Having been involved in politics myself for a long time before I took this job, I always ask, well, where are those other 20%? You know, we'd like to get it even higher, but 80% is pretty good.
Yeah.
In the off-year elections, city election or a state election every 2 years, the turnout's less, maybe 40%. It depends on the number of candidates and who's there. But this year we're expecting between early voting, absentee voting, and the actual election day on November 8th, I would be surprised if our numbers go below 80%. I have a feeling they'll go even higher because of the level of interest in this year in the presidential election and the other offices that'll be on the ballot and the ballot questions. It's going to be a busy ballot.
Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
I'd like to remind our viewers that you've been watching North Shore Journal. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski, and my special guest today has been City Clerk Wes Slate. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.